Well, it's actually a personal pleasure to have you here today, because look at this. You changed the cover. You must have changed the cover, but I did read it, and I did not just read it, I basically studied it, because it's super interesting. The Athos Diet, it's not really a term you hear that often.
Yeah, no, thanks, Denise. I really appreciate you having me, and I know all the good work you're doing online. It just seemed like an ally to connect with. So, I thought this was just a really relevant and good conversation to be had. I'm an emergency medicine physician, and in their sort of most urgent moments, this has been said before, but sometimes I find that in the emergency department, that the lifespan calculation's already been made. So it's kind of too late. Like we have a lot of things that we can do for people to put out fires, but we don't have the time or the opportunity at that point in the sequence to really make an intervention that might have been best made, decades before. And, health in terms of a scientific study is really a new process. I mean, when you really think about it, maybe the last 100 years we've been able to measure and monitor and sort of do controlled studies on different interventions, but prior to that, arguably, tens of thousands of years, millions of years, whatever your perspective is, we weren't really able to provide that feedback things. And so, it's a really exciting opportunity for me, and a very motivating one, to be able to add some type of preventative medicine to try to keep people out of the emergency department in the first place. And so this book kind of came out of that sort of insight, and so yeah, I'm just doing my little part to try to get people to make a difference early on when you still have an opportunity to do that.
That's awesome, and I could just say thank you. You're one of the few doctors who actually practice what they preach themselves, because it's just so easy for some medical person to be like, oh yeah, you have to move more, lose weight, like just give them that big junk and then give them no practical steps whatsoever. Because that's what really fascinated me with the book, that it's really those three pillars that we're gonna talk about in a little bit. But maybe, obviously I already know because I read the book, but maybe you can tell everyone how you just came up with it, how the whole ethos, like, I think there was a personal experience you had.
Yeah, sure. No, I think we all tried to sort of dig deep into our identities, our heritage, our history, and see what there might be of value to share with other people. And for me, being Greek descent, and as a result Greek Orthodox Christian, part of that discovery was this annoying principle, frankly, of fasting. So you turn the age of 7. And suddenly you're expected not to eat meat and dairy for a great portion of the year. And it sort of fluctuates. If you really tally up all the days, it's like over half the year, depending on the year. But basically Wednesdays and Fridays, 6 or 7 weeks before big holidays. And when you're a kid, in the 21st century, you kind of look at it as like, well, this is really frustrating. And I don't really know why I'm doing this, but I guess, my parents are birds and fly, and so I guess I'm a bird and I'll start flying too. And so you just sort of do it. And as many people say, sometimes you have to act things out before you understand them. And so in any case, as I sort of grew up and became a little bit more sophisticated, I started to try to discover whether or not there was some merit other than sort of like the labor of doing it. I think as a child, I'm told that it's a practice of the virtues, a practice of discipline. But as a scientist or as a doctor, taking another pass at this, you start realizing actually this might be like God's greatest gift to man in terms of keeping him out of the hospital and keeping his health, excellent. Right. And that's big. That's something to be said, because you try to think about what interventions most bang for your buck, or do we have to build hospitals? Do we have to build special machines or hook ourselves up to some interesting piece of technology every night, like CPAP, or get oxygen, which isn't available, to the rest of us in any purified form. And really, it seems like one of the greatest returns on investment is just dietary change, and specifically with optimizing some of these fasting practices, which I found in Orthodoxy. But it even gets a little bit more magical than that, because in order to really optimize those principles, you have to go to these like magical, mythical lands. I mean, I don't know how else to describe them in these regions of Greece called Athos. And Athos is a peninsula in Greece where people have been living for probably 1,200 years or more. If I understand correctly, it's actually the longest surviving government in the world. And it's also a UNESCO site. So people from all over the world go there for tourism, for spiritual meditation, for different things, for beauty. But it is like as if you went into Tolkien's book in Lord of the Rings or something from Narnia and just walked it. I mean, it's really that kind of magic place.
How old were you when you went?
Sorry, I was there the first time when I was 14, I believe.
Oh wow, okay.
And I've certainly been going to Greece for a long time, but even that region, honestly, is sort of a special place for Greeks to go. And what you find out is that these monastics have been living there separate from the world's technology, medicine, influence for a long time and have been outliving even the Mediterranean diet, as is so popularly termed, for a very long time. And so, again, it's kind of like what's something that we can do that sort of is separate from the technology, separate from all the capital investment and complexity, and can give us that longevity, functionality, and health benefit. And I think there was the quote once that said, any fool can complicate things, but it takes genius to simplify them. Yeah. And in my mind, it's like fasting is exactly that. It's just cut right through it, and there's the health benefit.
Wow, you as a kid already kind of got curious about your origin and everything. That's turned out to be a blessing years later. Is that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like we all have our own sort of Simba story, out there, and we're all trying to sort of make good on some of those little pieces of wisdom and heritage that we've all been given and provided. And there's a lot of good stuff out there, especially that's ancient, that's old. And again, while I don't dismiss Western advancement in medicine, again, it's a beautiful, miraculous thing that we can help people with things like heart attacks and strokes and diabetes, etc. Once these things are sort of certain, but to be able to prevent them in the first place, that is the ultimate good, I think.
That's amazing, and without the use of any medication or anything, just by the lifestyle you kind of establish, right?
Yes, and again, it's interesting that the tradition starts when you're 7. It's not like, hey, we want to start you when you're 30. When like your youth is behind you, or
when all your habits have been formed, like it's so hard to break.
Exactly, the habits been formed, and who knows? For that matter, maybe those stem cells, maybe those undifferentiated portions of your body get even more benefit when you start earlier. I'm not sure, but what I can say is that one way or another, the wisdom of this tradition sort of intervenes early on in that lifespan. And so, in any case, what I do have a critique, though, and one of those critiques is that in the U.S. in particular, and in the 21st century in particular, you try to practice this fasting routine, which is basically a vegan one in this tradition, and you start to realize that you can game the system, right? You can avoid meat and dairy, but you can eat all the white bread you want, all the candy you want, all the trans fat, that used to be a big thing, margarine, whatnot, that was out there. And what's really cool is that when I started to look into these communities as to how they did it, this fasting practice, I realized how to optimize that tradition best. And so that's where these 3 prongs or these 3 pillars of the diet come in, which is including intermittent fasting, which is probably the biggest part. The second is avoiding meat and dairy for 48 days, and finally walking. And I think these 3 pieces are really comprehensive in the sense that it addresses when we eat, what we eat, and then also sort of talks about what level of activity is sort of prescribed. And while there's so much out there, I mean, I like to lift weights and do all sorts of active things. I used to be a rugby player or whatever, but the point is that we don't have to overcomplicate it. It's really, walking seems to be the best return on investment for exercise out there. And I think between these 3 prongs, it's just like the perfect lifestyle for a 21st century citizen. I don't know necessarily if you're going to become Eddie the Strongman doing the diet.
Maybe not.
Or necessarily like the world's best bodybuilder, but in terms of just like a healthy, a healthy body, something that allows you to have a healthy mind and energy,
Right.
and longevity and functionality. I mean, it's all there. It really is. It's definitely found between those three prongs.
That is amazing. So let me just sum that up for everybody watching. So the three pillars, we got the intermittent fasting, we got a diet that is just high in protein, and the walking part. So now when you say intermittent fasting, how would you personally define that? Like, what does that mean to you? Like, is it like a schedule or the extended fast or?
Well, these are good questions. Intermittent fasting, basically is confining all the calories that you will be eating in a day to a certain window of time in the day, and that's how I would refer to it. In my mind, the less time you are eating, and the smaller amount of time that you are, consuming foods and calories, is when you get the best return on investment. Now, what I see is that the liver itself is able to store about 16 to maybe 17 hours worth of sugar, of glycogen, for your body to use at any one time. So really to burn through that so that you can start this process of ketosis, you really need to be fasting at least 16 or 17 hours a day, which hence is why we recommend no more than eating 8 hours throughout the day. And the important thing about that too is to recognize that your body has sort of this dual system that's sort of based on your nervous system. One of them is colloquially referred to as the fight and flight system, which is your sympathetic nervous system. The other one is your rest and digest system, which is your parasympathetic nervous system. The reason this is important to recognize is that one of the biggest movers of this nervous system is when you eat. And you can confuse your body all day long if you're eating all day long. There are periods of time where you want to be sort of like that, individual, running after your food to find it, to get work done. And then there's also a period of time where you want to rest and digest. And so what I find interesting is a lot of people who are kind of snacking and munching all day long, what I found anyway, and I think a lot of people would agree, is that you're kind of always feeling a little bit groggy. There's sort of this vicious cycle of when I talk about it in the book, but waking up in the morning, get to work, making jokes with your friends at work, coworkers. Oh yeah, I'm tired. Here's more coffee, and let's get another coffee, and then
let's get a
oh my
donut
God,
with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait till lunch. And then you have this total drop after lunch, and and then you're like waiting for work to be over, and then you're tired. Like, when are we not tired? Like, can we just please stop this vicious cycle? And so anyway, what I found, and I think this is definitely proven in my own life as a case study anyway, is that I'm working in the emergency department, sometimes managing 25 patients at once. All my coworkers are like, "Oh, Pete doesn't eat." I'm like, "Guys, you don't understand. I definitely eat, but I just don't eat all the time."
Right.
But I'm very productive during the day. And so, in any case, what I think I'm doing, and I think this is what the biohack is all about, is when you're intermittent fasting in this manner, you are turning on your sympathetic nervous system by nature of not eating. And so your body's kind of telling itself, oh my God, we need to eat food, we need to look for food, we need to do whatever we can to immobilize energy and to keep our mind clear and active. And so you have this energy to sort of navigate your day that you would not have otherwise had. Now, that's sort of a cerebral sort of experience of the sympathetic nervous system. The next question is, well, can you keep that up with exercise? If you're that runner or that lifter. And I see no reason why that's not possible. And that's why the second prong is so important, because not only are you avoiding certain foods, but then you're also still trying to get your macronutrients in, like protein. And if you can do that, you can really keep yourself going very long in terms of like physical activity as well as the cerebral stuff. So in any case, I think there's a lot to be said about the metabolics of and the physiology of how this works out for people. Never mind the fact that animals that intermittent fast throughout their lifetime live 30% longer.
Wow.
Which, I think is like, well, what is that all about? A fountain of youth, to say the least. And I don't know if you ever met some like centennials, people who are like 100 or 90 or whatever, but for whatever reason, I often find them not looking that old, when I see them in emergency departments. and again, get to see them in a different, part of their life, but there's got to be something about aging well that is kind of like staying youthful. I guess that's somewhat obvious, but you're not just like a ripe prune, staying alive for 150 years. You almost have to still appear youthful to stay alive for that amount of time.
So tell us about your personal routine. Like, obviously you don't eat at work, but do you eat in the evenings or more in the mornings, or?
Yeah, good question. For me, it probably ends up being no more than 4 hours a day. So, I find that's a good amount of time where I can kind of be intentional about what I eat, sort of enjoy all the different parts and pieces of those series of meals, and kind of get all my nutrition in, my macronutrients in for the day without shortchanging myself. There are days where I might just eat one really large meal over the course of, an hour or two. But yeah, I personally kind of do about a 4-hour fast, a 4-hour window where I'm not fasting. And so, by math, that leaves me about 20 hours a day where, I'm not eating. Now, in that 20 hours, I am still having, black coffee, green tea, lots of carbonated water. That's my thing. I like a lot of seltzer water. But then when I hit those 4 hours, I'm definitely trying to, eat in a clean way. But also, make sure I get enough protein in, and it's great. I mean, it definitely makes you grateful for the food that you are consuming over those 4 hours. You definitely taste it more, or more excited about it, and it's not just like an open bag of chips where you just kind of find yourself munching here and there.
And not even realizing.
Like, did I just eat all that? I don't even remember putting my hand in the bag. So that's how I live it day to day. And so it's about 20 hours. And I find that when I really get things down well, I think there's science to prove this. When you're in a sympathetic dominant state 20 hours a day where you're high energy, breaking down fat, etc., then when it's time to rest and digest, you are ready to rest and digest. It's like you are truly yes, you are truly no. You are truly hot, you are truly cold, and nothing's confused. And so what I find is that I sleep better, I sleep more soundly, and it kind of just affects really every aspect of life.
It's very true. This might be a little bit of a personal question, but I know it's a lot of our members have this issue. It's just the social aspect of it. Like, I've seen in the book, beautiful picture, you got a beautiful family, you got kids.
Thank you.
How does that work? Do you have a meal together with them, or is daddy just eating at different times, or?
That's a good question. I do end up eating dinner with them, and so usually routinely I probably end up eating between 2 p.m. to 6 or 3 to 7, something like that in the afternoon, and so I get to at least have dinner with them. Now, I will say this too: the Athos Diet itself mimics sort of the timeline of fasting for Great Lent, which is about a 48-day period. But then I also recommend people do it, throughout the year as sort of in bursts, in certain patterns. So, purely speaking, the Athos Diet is a 48-day journey. But at the same time, the way that I sort of carry that out into my daily life is oftentimes, whenever I'm fasting, and that ends up being over half the year, that I tend to sort of optimize that day, whether it be Wednesday and Friday, so several weeks during the summer, weeks leading up to Christmas, etc. I try to jump into this pattern. There are days where I don't intermittent fast, but what I found is as I get these parameters right, is that I find myself sort of like just sort of doing it inherently, almost like without intention, suddenly realizing, I'm not really hungry right now, and I don't know why I would be eating anyway. So, but you're right that there are times, weddings, baptisms, kids are having a special something, and so sometimes I might just shift things a little bit. Other times, you just have to live life and try to be as as balanced as possible in regards to what seems to matter most. Because you're right, it is a very social thing.
That's true. And are you kids 7 yet? Will they get to decide what to do, or are they just kind of hopping on the train?
Yeah, they are actually. So my oldest is 13. My youngest is 6.
Okay.
So three of the 4 are fasting.
Okay, wow.
And, they have really great discipline. I mean, it is kind of an intimidating thing to go to school, to to not participate in some of the foods that are being eaten. And again, this is beyond the topic of the book per se, but there's nothing bad about meat or dairy or about the molecules that we're consuming. It's just that for certain parts of the year, there's a certain discipline to that. And then, like I said, evidently quite a bit of health return on investment too from doing it.
I actually did like that. What you're saying is that you're kind of like not restricting yourself completely, but just on like the Wednesday and Friday, like kind of just weave it into the week instead of being like, I'm gonna never eat this again or not eat it for 3 months, or like it's just kind of like sometimes we even do that without realizing. Like if you just not have meat or not have dairy that day, you wouldn't even know. So that actually, for myself, even when I read it, was like, hey, that's smart. I could maybe just do 1 day a week where I could just cut it out without making a big deal out of it.
Sure. No, I think you're right. And I think one of the things I try to highlight is that this seasonality to life is so natural to really our experience. I mean, there are seasons of the year, there's night, there's day, there's cold, there's hot, like things fluctuate. And so I think if you become too unilinear or unidimensional, it's just not sort of consistent with how life really moves. And so if our bodies were built in these conditions where there's famine and there's feasting, where there's changing of seasons, I think ourselves, we have to follow those cycles too. And I think there's a lot of evidence to prove that, whether it's bodybuilders that have to cycle through different workouts, whether it's people who are trying to lose weight, trying to have to like kind of reset the system every once in a while to remind the body to sort of adjust. So in that regard, while there are components of the Athos diet that really are very healthy, I think overall, perhaps to do parts and pieces every day, but in terms of that, strictly to stick to those 3 prongs every day, I think it really has to be a seasonal thing.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the walking thing. Like walking, how would you define that? Like how long should we walk? How fast should we walk? Should we do this every day?
It's funny. I always just considered walking as like an old man's person, like sport or something, where I'm just like, oh yes, we're going to go for a walk. But the science kind of suggests otherwise. I think that 30 minutes is supposed to be done at a pace where you could listen to a podcast and sort of still pay attention, where you're able to chat and still kind of keep a conversation, maybe not quite as expanded as you're used to, but it doesn't have to be power walking. You don't have to be going up hills. I mean, really, the studies that I've reviewed show that walking is it's not jogging, it's not sprinting. I mean, it's just walking. And so, the time though is 30 minutes. The science is clear on that. It can't be anything less than 30 minutes. Okay. And there's always benefit to keep going, but the return on investment just isn't as high after that 30 minutes. But I mean, it's incredible. People who walk 30 minutes a day, they have lower rates of depression, they live longer, they're economically more successful, they're higher functioning, they have better marriage, they have better mood.
Wow.
I mean, it's just all over, like the panacea for in and of itself, regardless of the other 2 pillars, a very positive practice. And again, kind of going back to the philosophy of it, I mean, it's just interesting that societies all over the world, many of them do have like a walking philosophical kind of culture. Henry David Thoreau was a philosopher in America that we know was a great thinker that used to walk, several hours a day. The Greeks, they had a whole group of philosophers called the Peripatetics, which peripatao in Greek means walk. So they would walk and talk, and so, it's just kind of interesting that mind and body kind of aligns itself with walking, and no doubt it turns out to be a great medicine, really.
And would you recommend to just do that 30 minutes of walking in a fasted state or right after you ate, or does it not matter really?
I think it would be great if people did it right after their eating window. And the reason for that is we know that after eating a whole bunch of food, if you kind of turn on your muscles, so to speak, to start pulling that sugar from your system, it'll by default, pull that, keep that insulin sugar sort of peak, to a minimum. It sort of brings it down a little bit. So, when I see a diabetic in the emergency department and their sugar's 700 when it should be like 130 after a meal, doing a little exercise after a meal helps that sugar come down in a healthy individual. So yeah, I think it would be great to do it right after your eating window. And truly, when I'm doing my exercise, and most of the time it's walking, but sometimes it's lifting too. And then certainly outside of the 48-day Athos Diet fast, it's a lot of lifting. But I tend to try to jump on that wave of energy and get some exercise in.
What I personally really like about this approach, or even the way you wrote it, and I want to just show it to everybody, because I do want to encourage you guys to get the book. Maybe you can tell us where you would send them to. But you actually put a little chart in here where it's all explained, and it's got all, we're trying to sum it up, and you can always just watch the replay and just hear it again. But it's really, I personally find this so doable. Like, it's nothing crazy. Like, it's not, you have to, I don't know, like, only eat vegan or just swallow this magic pill or just do crazy HIIT workouts. Or, like, guys, honestly, it's the intermittent fasting, which we're in this group, all of us are doing anyway. It's really just try a high protein, and the way you wrote it here is just eliminate excess carbohydrates, consume adequate protein, and you even give some recommendation, like just no fewer than 100 grams protein.
I tried to distill it down to one page, and I put that insert in throughout the book just to remind people at the end of the day, we want you to do what you're reading about. And so, I think this kind of comes from my emergency medicine sort of background. It's like, there's only so much time for philosophy and explanation. At some point, we just have to act and execute. And so I wanted to make sure that this book was written in a way that people could really act on it. And so that chart was my attempt to do that.
You did an amazing job too. And I think maybe it was Einstein who said you haven't understood something completely until you can explain it in a very simple way. And you've proven that with this book. And it even has all those, like back here, you even give the plans, like the daily plans, to put it in here. So it's not just a book, it's already
we wanted people to be able to kind of page through the book as they're walking through the 48 days and sort of keep track of things and get some advice and some motivation. And if you write it down, it just helps kind of manifest your philosophies into something real. I think it's all part of that same process of let's just get up and do it.
All right, so we got 2 more questions, and then I'm gonna let you go, not to take too much of your time. So let's say someone's listening or watching the replay or whatever, and they're like, okay, I got the 3 pillars, I want to do it, but maybe I want to take it even slower than this. And is there any order? Like, if you say, okay, Pete, I can only do 1 or 2 right now, which one should I start with, or which one should I?
I think the best thing you could do is probably the intermittent fasting. If you really had to say, hey doc, I can't change my diet at all. I can't change the amount of food I eat at all. But if you can confine the window of when you eat those calories and do as short of time span as possible, you're still getting quite a bit of health benefit. And so, there have been studies where they actually genetically modify mice where they can't stop eating. They have no way of knowing when to stop consuming foods. And they actually take those mice and make them intermittent fast because they're in a cage and they can only eat food when they, but then they put a whole bunch of food in there and they allow them to eat during, those several hours. And believe it or not, those same mice, they stay obese. I mean, they stay sort of, visually large, okay? But in terms of their lab profiles, cholesterol and insulin sensitivity, etc., they're actually quite healthy mice, which is pretty wild. So anyway, if someone had to pick between the 3 pillars and sort of start somewhere, I would start with the intermittent fasting piece. And what's interesting to me, again, when you kind of go back to Mount Athos, this area in Greece, as to what's so inspiring about it. A lot of those monks don't eat until the 9th hour, which is 3 p.m. And the reason they do that is because they're fasting with Jesus. He didn't eat anything for the day. So, in their minds, 1,200 years ago, they didn't have any studies to prove anything, but in their willingness to try to do something, inspiring, I guess, they discovered intermittent fasting, and they've been outliving us all for centuries. Just wild. So yeah, I mean, and of course they're pretty active people walking around getting things done, but at the same time, I do think that intermittent fasting piece truly is the best return on investment.
Okay, and then what would be the second one if we had to put it in order? Should they do intermittent fasting and walk, or rather intermittent fast and lower carbs?
Well, this is what I'll say. I found that when that documentary came out called The Game Changers, it was a gentleman trying to prove that actually going vegan was superior to eating a lot of meat and dairy, etc. And they had this great debate on the topic, going back and forth, vegan versus sort of carnivore. And what you really start to realize, and I think this is why both sides are kind of right, is that when you start getting extreme with diet, you in essence start promoting an elimination diet. If you're carnivore, you're eliminating a lot of crap. If you're vegan, you're eliminating a lot of crap. So a lot of these studies actually are like carnivore versus the American diet, which is filled with crap, which is filled with stuff, and then vegan versus the American diet, which is, and so vegan and carnivore are both seen as extraordinary diets. They're very effective, but no one has taken sort of a pure vegan play versus pure carnivore play at this point to see who really wins out. And I wonder actually who does win out, but I do see that the commonality between the two philosophies is that they do eliminate a lot of stuff from their diet that's processed, that's fast food, that's a lot of content that's added extra for preservation's sake and not for taste or nutrition. And so, I would say this: if you're doing intermittent fasting, great. And then next thing to do is just keep the diet simple and pure. And I think that's the next probably big return, for your efforts is just getting rid of that stuff that we really just don't need in our meals. We didn't need it for tens of thousands of years, and we don't need it now.
That's very true. All right, guys. So we got the intermittent fasting, we got the high protein, and the walking. Kind of like it even is on the thing. So that's already in order. All right.
No, it's true.
Perfect. so you did that just naturally. All right. So our last question always kind of is: imagine you'd have to go to like an island, and you could only bring 3 foods, like an unlimited supply of 3 foods.
Wow.
What 3 foods would you bring? Like, what's never missing in your fridge, and how could you survive?
3 foods. I mean, I guess we're assuming there's plenty of fresh water on there, right?
Yeah. That's all.
Hopefully seltzer.
We'll have one of the soda machines and.
3 foods. I mean, I'm a big olive oil guy.
Okay.
I think that's that's just the ingredient that goes into a lot of my, on top of the foods I cook and bake.
Do you fry in olive oil as well, or just?
Usually it's baked in olive oil, and then it's on all my salads, and of course, at times I'll just have like a little bread with olive oil.
Okay,
That's quite tasty. But I think it's probably one of those cleanest, foods out there in terms of just the fat content that's actually good for you.
And is it the extra virgin one, or which one are you getting? Because olive oil seems to be a universe in itself.
You're right. I tend to try to go for, as extra virgin as possible.
Okay.
And I've even heard actually you're supposed to get them in the green.
In the darker bottles.
Yeah, something with the sun sometimes breaks down the olive oil if it's left out too long. So anyway, extra virgin olive oil, and preferably if you could have the dark green containers, that'd be great.
All right, so we got all that.
Yeah, I mean, the second thing, and again, this is me speaking outside the Athos diet, but I mean, I make a great baked chicken, and I think chicken is just that meat that I think is lean enough. But I also like fish a lot too. I don't know, I'm a salmon guy.
Or maybe you could catch the fish on that island, so you'd bring the chicken, maybe. Yeah.
Hey, there we go. Chicken on land and chicken in the sea, in the water. Okay, so let's do. I would have to say olive oil. I would have to say, if we're following the Athos diet, some shrimp. Okay. And then like if I could grow peas on that island and just have gigantic amount of peas every day, I think between those 3 things, I'd be getting all my macros in and have a lot of energy and live pretty long.
Well, that's great. Thank you. That's a great advice to anyone. So we got, sparkling or seltzer water. That's a given. And we got the olive oil, shrimp, and peas. That was it?
Yeah.
Are you a legume guy? Like, is that generally something you recommend? Like also the chickpeas and all that other stuff? Or?
I mean, I just find that peas just have an incredible amount of protein, associated with them, and you can really get, I think almost every essential amino acid in there. Peas and rice, I guess, but it's a very good food for you. And as they say, a lot of studies show that countries that eat or get their protein from plant sources have lower rates of cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer. I mean, it's colon cancer. It's really one of the only reasons I sort of challenge, sort of the lion diets and the carnivore diets out there. I really do think that they are very effective compared to the American diet. I just would like to see more studies on the long-term implications of like colon cancer and prostate cancer, because I think the studies right now anyway suggest that, it is a risk factor. But like I said, I think the panacea for all of that is just cycling through this stuff. You just can't be a pure play on anything. And so if you're going through your year and there's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and a fast, and you probably have the benefits of everything, and it just makes life a little bit more rich.
Yeah, awesome. Well, let's say people have been watching and they watch the replay or whatever, and they say, "Damn, this all sounds great. How can I get more of you? How can I get the book? Can I follow you online? Where can I go? Where should people?"
Yeah, thank you, Denise. You can go online to theathosdiet.com, theathosdiet.com, and we're available on Amazon.
Okay.
I think Walmart sells our book.
Wow.
We also have an audio book narrated by this really great British guy who just did a fantastic job. I mean, you want to listen to it for content, or just want to listen to it to like just ease your mind and go into the next. It's that kind of narration.
Awesome, thank you, and I'll write that in the chat later for you guys. So, well, anyway, once again, thank you so much, not just for your time today and for the very interesting insights and just your very personal opinion on stuff, but really for writing it down in just such a practical and easy way for everyone, even if you're not English speaking. Like, a lot of people or a lot of doctors try to be as eloquent as possible and seem as smart as possible.
Yeah.
But in here, this is really, the way it's written, it's really just, it just helps. I can feel your heart, and I can feel that you set out here to just make a difference and just really help people with that. And I think you've done an amazing job. With all the confusion that's out there nowadays and all the, even fighting, even in those online communities, people are bashing, no, you should eat this, you should do this, you should do HIIT cardio, no, you should do weights. Like, it's been like just a relief to have someone be like, hey guys, you can do all that, but there's 3 pillars. And if you just get started with that, that's awesome. I just want to thank you.
Thank you, Denise. And the last thing I'll say is I find that one of the great things about the Athos Diet is that truly, if you're a 75-year-old who has diabetic ulcers and can't walk, there's something in there for you. If you're a 23-year-old athlete that's trying to optimize their health and kind of clean things up, there's something in there too, and everything in between. So, the stakes are high. The conversation is really about keeping your family alive in this world to be part of your team for as long as possible. And again, I think it's unfortunate we frame the conversation oftentimes in terms of, I don't know. I mean, again, I'm all about walking the beach and keeping my wife's eyes on me. But at the same time, I think also that this does eventually translate into, death. And we have to avoid that. Like mortality, morbidity. They're very high stakes, very important topics that we're wrestling with here. And so, let's take it seriously and soberly. And here are 3 very powerful tools to keep your family on this planet, because it's a tough world, it's a tough life, and it gets even tougher when your team gets smaller. And so let's do what we can to keep us all together.
Well, amen to that. Thank you so much. I got nothing to add other than huge thank you once again. Have you eaten today, or is it dinner time now? Or
you know what? We were celebrating Father's Day coming up this weekend, so I got surprised this morning with preps in bed, which was pretty awesome.
Okay.
My kids are at this great age right now where their food actually tastes fantastic. So the eating window started early, and so it's just seltzer water and teas for me until tomorrow. So.
Awesome. Well, happy Father's Day coming up. Once again, thank you so much, and I'm sure you've helped a lot of people today, and you will continue to help thousands with your book and audiobook and all that. So
thank you.
Awesome. It was a huge pleasure to meet you in person too.
Oh yeah, no, the pleasure was mine. Thanks, Denise. Until next time.
Thank you so much, Pete. Bye-bye.